I am Mia, 34 years old, and I never thought a family dinner would change everything. The moment is seared into my memory. 23 guests seated at my mother-in-law Patricia's elegant dining table, watching as servers placed sizzling steaks in front of everyone except me. My empty plate sat like a spotlight on my exclusion. When my aunt asked why I got nothing, Patricia smiled thinly and said those words that still echo. I only ordered for family. The silence felt eternal until I finally spoke up. If you are watching this, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from as I tell you what happens when I finally stood up to the woman who never considered me family. My story starts long before that infamous dinner. I grew up in a loving middle-class home in Boston with parents who worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities they never had. My father drove a delivery truck for 30 years, and my mother worked as a secretary at an elementary school. They sacrificed everything to send me to college, making me the first in our family to earn a degree. I worked through school, took out loans, and eventually earned my master's in speech therapy. By the time I met Brian, I had built a successful practice working with children with speech disabilities. My work was fulfilling, helping kids find their voice and confidence. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a practical car, and had a small circle of close friends. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was authentically mine, built through hard work and determination. I met Brian at a wedding 3 years ago. He was the best man. I was a college friend of the bride. We locked eyes across the reception hall in that cliché way you never think happens in real life. He was handsome in his tailored suit with kind eyes and an easy smile. When he asked me to dance, the connection was immediate. We talked until the venue staff started stacking chairs around us. Brian was a financial analyst from a wealthy family in Connecticut. His father, Stephen, built a successful investment firm, and his mother, Patricia, came from old money. Brian had attended private schools, Ivy League universities, and moved in social circles I had only seen in movies. Despite our different backgrounds, we connected on a deeper level. He was intelligent, ambitious, but down to earth and made me laugh like no one else. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, he proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. I said yes without hesitation, believing we could bridge any gap between our worlds. That was my first mistake. I underestimated how deeply class divisions could run, especially for someone like Patricia. I first met Brian's parents at our engagement dinner. Stephen was polite, if somewhat distant, a tall man with silver hair who seemed more comfortable discussing market trends than personal matters. But Patricia was another story entirely. She was elegantly dressed in designer clothes that looked effortless, but probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me. Throughout that first dinner, Patricia peppered me with questions that felt like an interrogation. Where exactly did I grow up? What did my parents do? Or did I attend school? Each answer seemed to disappoint her, though she maintained a veneer of politeness. She mentioned Brian's ex-girlfriend Julia several times, noting her family's vacation home in Martha's Vineyard and her father's position as a hospital director. Julia and Brian made such a handsome couple at the Prescott Charity Gala, she reminisced, showing me a photo on her phone. Her mother and I were on the committee together. Such a shame things didn't work out. Brian seemed oblivious to these subtle digs. He adored his mother and couldn't see past her polished exterior. Whenever I gently mentioned her behavior later, he would defend her intentions. Mom is just protective. She wants to make sure I'm happy. Give her time. She'll warm up to you. Time, unfortunately, only seemed to make things worse. Brian's sister, Elaine, initially appeared friendly, complimenting my earrings or asking about my work, but there was an underlying competitiveness in her interactions, constantly mentioning her own achievements or subtly correcting my etiquette mistakes at family gatherings. Brian's brother, Michael, and his wife, Stephanie, maintained a polite distance, They were cordial but never warm, following Patricia's lead and keeping me at arm's length. I later learned that Stephanie had endured similar treatment when she first joined the family, but eventually won approval by working at Stephen's firm and adapting to their lifestyle. I tried everything to win Patricia's approval. I brought thoughtful gifts to family gatherings, researched topics she was interested in, offered to help with her charity events. Each effort was either forgotten or dismissed. The crystal vase I gave her for her birthday somehow never made it out of its box. My offer to help with her annual charity auction was declined because the committee is already set. The only relative who showed me genuine kindness was my Aunt Madeline, my mother's sister, who lived in Connecticut, not far from Brian's family. Madeline was my anchor, providing perspective and support when I felt like I was drowning in Patricia's subtle hostility. Unlike my parents, who lived in Arizona now, Madeline could attend family functions and witness the dynamics firsthand. When the invitation arrived for Patricia's annual family dinner celebrating Stephen's retirement, I approached it with both hope and dread. The embossed card specified black tie attire and a 7-course meal prepared by a renowned chef. Madeline had also been invited, which was unusual, but gave me some comfort. I later learned that Stephen and Madeline had been friends in college, something Patricia was not pleased about, but tolerated because of Stephen's insistence. "This is an important night," Brian told me as we prepared for the event. "Dad is finally stepping back from the firm, and Mom has been planning this dinner for months. Everyone will be there, the whole extended family." I nodded, selecting a conservative black dress that I hoped would meet Patricia's exacting standards. "I know. I'll do everything I can to make sure it goes perfectly." If only I had known then how that night would unfold and how it would change everything. The evening of Stephen's retirement celebration arrived with a perfect October chill in the air. Brian and I pulled up to his parents' colonial mansion in our Audi, joining the line of luxury vehicles in the circular driveway. The house was illuminated like a picture from Architectural Digest, with tasteful landscape lighting highlighting the manicured gardens and stone facade. "You look beautiful," Brian said, squeezing my hand before we walked to the imposing front door. I had spent hours preparing, wearing the black dress I had saved 3 months to afford, with my hair professionally styled and makeup carefully applied to look elegant but not overdone. Patricia greeted us at the door herself, bypassing the hired staff, who took coats and directed other guests. She embraced Brian warmly, holding him tight and exclaiming how handsome he looked in his tuxedo. When she turned to me, her smile cooled noticeably. She offered a brief air kiss near my cheek, careful not to actually make contact. "Mia, you made it," she said, as though my attendance had been uncertain. She made no comment about my appearance, before turning to welcome the guests behind us. The grand foyer opened to several elegantly decorated rooms, filled with about 40 people in formal attire. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and staff in black and white uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the main salon. I recognized many faces from previous family gatherings: Stephen's brother and his wife, Brian's cousins from Boston, several partners from the firm. Patricia's sister Charlotte held court near the fireplace, gesturing dramatically as she spoke to an attentive audience. As Brian led me through the rooms, stopping to greet relatives and friends, I noticed the family photographs arranged on tables and walls. There were professional portraits of Brian and his siblings as children, candid shots from family vacations, and several of Stephen and Patricia at various social functions. I searched, but couldn't find a single photo from our wedding, though there were recent pictures of both Michael and Elaine with their spouses. "Brian, come here, son," Stephen called from across the room. Brian squeezed my hand apologetically before heading over to join his father and several older men I recognized as senior partners at the firm. Left on my own, I wandered toward the dining room, admiring the elaborate table setting visible through the doorway. The long mahogany table was set for 23, with fine china, crystal stemware, and silver flatware arranged with mathematical precision. Name cards in elegant calligraphy marked each place setting. "Quite the production, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find my Aunt Madeline, elegant in a deep blue gown, her silver hair styled in her signature bob. "Madeline!" I embraced her, genuinely relieved to see a friendly face. "I didn't know you would be here." "Stephen and I go way back," she said with a wink. "College friends. Patricia knows this but conveniently forgets whenever possible. Stephen made sure I was included tonight." As we chatted, a server approached with a tray of champagne flutes. He offered one to Madeline, but moved to walk past me without stopping. I had to reach out and ask, "May I have one as well, please?" The server looked momentarily confused, then nodded and allowed me to take a glass. As he walked away, I noticed Patricia watching the interaction from across the room, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't let her get to you," Madeline whispered, following my gaze. "That's exactly what she wants." Throughout the next hour, I noticed similar small exclusions. Servers consistently overlooked me when offering canapés. When Elaine showed everyone her new diamond bracelet, a gift from her husband, Patricia suggested it was exactly the kind of quality piece that comes from good breeding and taste, while glancing pointedly at my modest jewelry. The most obvious flight came when Patricia circulated through the room, personally refilling wine glasses. She topped off everyone's drink, engaging in brief conversation with each guest. When she reached Madeline and me, she refreshed Madeline's glass while asking about her recent trip to France. Then, without acknowledging me, she turned to move away. As she did, her elbow accidentally bumped my arm, causing red wine to splash onto my black dress. "Oh dear," she said without real concern. "You should go to the powder room and take care of that. Down the hall, second door." In the bathroom, I dabbed at the stain with a damp towel, fighting back tears of frustration. Through the vent, I could hear voices from the adjacent room, which I realized was Patricia's study. "She's trying so hard. It's painful to watch," Patricia's voice said. "That dress is clearly off the rack, and those shoes with that handbag." "Mom, be nice," Elaine's voice replied, though she was laughing. "Brian seems happy." "For now," Patricia said. "Julia called last week, still single. I've always thought they would find their way back to each other eventually." I froze. The damp towel pressed against my dress. Brian had dated Julia for 3 years before meeting me. They had broken up because, according to Brian, they wanted different things in life. I had no idea they were still in contact, much less that Patricia was actively keeping those lines of communication open. When I returned to the party, Brian was deep in conversation with his father about the transition of leadership at the firm. He barely noticed my return, nodding absently when I touched his arm. The strain of maintaining a pleasant expression while feeling increasingly unwelcome was becoming exhausting. Finally, Patricia announced that dinner would be served. Guests began moving toward the dining room, searching for their assigned seats. I checked each elegantly written name card, but couldn't find mine anywhere along the table. "Brian, I don't see my place card." He looked surprised, then shrugged. "Probably just an oversight. Here, you can sit between me and Madeline." He casually pulled up an additional chair, disrupting the careful spacing of the place settings. The chair he added had no charger plate, no crystal glasses, none of the elaborate place setting that everyone else had. Patricia noticed immediately. "Brian, we had the seating arranged very specifically," she said, her voice tight. "It's fine, Mom. Mia can sit here." As everyone settled into their seats, I felt Patricia's disapproving glances each time I spoke. When I answered Stephen's polite question about my work with a young client's breakthrough, Patricia interrupted to ask Michael's wife about their recent vacation, effectively cutting me off mid-sentence. The tension was building, but I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The dining room glowed with the light of dozens of candles and the antique crystal chandelier overhead. Fine china gleamed against the dark mahogany table, each place setting accompanied by an array of silverware that made me silently thank Madeline for the crash course in formal dining etiquette she had given me months ago. Floral arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas created a sophisticated centerpiece running the length of the table. Once everyone was seated, servers appeared from the kitchen in choreographed precision. The head server announced the first course, a delicate lobster bisque with truffle oil, as white porcelain bowls were placed before each guest. Each guest except me. I sat awkwardly as everyone around me received their appetizer. Brian was engaged in conversation with his brother about quarterly projections for the firm and didn't immediately notice. Madeline, however, did. "Excuse me," she said to a passing server. "My niece didn't receive the first course." The server looked uncomfortable and glanced toward Patricia, who smiled placidly from the head of the table. "I believe we're one setting short," Patricia said. "The chef prepared exactly enough for the invited guests. Perhaps you could share with Brian, Mia." The implication was clear. I hadn't been included in the original count because I hadn't really been invited, merely tolerated as Brian's +1. Brian finally noticed the situation and frowned slightly. "Mom, could the kitchen prepare another portion?" "The bisque is quite complex, dear. It was prepared in exact quantities. I'm sure Mia understands." Her tone suggested that making an issue of it would be terribly unsophisticated. Brian hesitated, then pushed his bowl slightly toward me. "We can share," he said quietly before returning to his conversation with Michael. I took a small spoonful of the bisque, my appetite diminishing with each passing moment. Around the table, conversation flowed about investments, recent vacations, and Elaine's daughter's acceptance to an exclusive private school. I remained silent, feeling increasingly invisible. The lobster bisque was rich and creamy, with delicate truffle notes that should have been delicious. Instead, it tasted like humiliation. Each spoonful I took from Brian's bowl felt like a reminder that I was an afterthought, someone who didn't merit her own serving. I watched Patricia from across the table as she engaged animatedly with her guests, her laugh ringing out at appropriate moments, her attention deliberately avoiding me completely. "The weather has been particularly lovely this fall," Charlotte was saying to the woman beside her. "Perfect for our annual charity horse show next weekend. Patricia, you've outdone yourself with the planning committee this year." "Thank you, Charlotte. Though I must say, having the right people involved makes all the difference. Quality recognizes quality." Her eyes swept past me as if I were invisible furniture. When the second course arrived, a small plate of scallops with a beurre blanc sauce, the pattern repeated. Everyone received a serving except me. This time, I didn't bother to point it out, and neither did Brian. He absently offered me one of his scallops while discussing the merits of European versus American business schools with his cousin James. "Harvard Business School really prepares you differently. The network alone is invaluable. Where did you say your wife went to school, Brian?" There was a pause. "State University," Brian mumbled, cutting into his scallop. "But Mia worked incredibly hard. She's built a successful practice." "How admirable," James replied, with the kind of polite dismissal that suggested my achievements were quaint, but ultimately irrelevant to their world. I focused on the single scallop Brian had given me, cutting it into tiny pieces to make it last longer. The sauce was exquisite, but the taste was overshadowed by the growing knot in my stomach. Around the table, 22 other people enjoyed full servings while engaging in animated conversations about topics that seemed designed to exclude me. Private clubs I'd never heard of, charity galas I'd never attended, vacation destinations that cost more than my annual salary. "We're thinking of purchasing a second home in the Hamptons," Michael's wife Stephanie was telling the group near her. "Something with direct beach access. Patricia, didn't you mention that lovely property the Weatherbys just listed?" "Oh, yes. Oceanfront, 6 bedrooms, historic charm. Though the asking price is quite steep, 8.5 million, I believe. But when you have taste and the means to afford quality, why compromise?" The numbers being thrown around so casually made my head spin. $8.5 million was more money than I could comprehend, yet these people discussed it like I might talk about buying a new couch. By the third course, a pellet cleansing sorbet, I noticed several guests casting uncomfortable glances in my direction as I sat with an empty place before me. Stephen appeared confused, but said nothing, deferring to his wife's management of the dinner, as he had presumably done for decades. "This sorbet is absolutely divine, Patricia," gushed one of the older women. "What's the secret?" "Mayor lemon and fresh mint from our greenhouse. I believe in using only the finest ingredients, though I suppose not everyone has access to such luxuries." But comment hung in the air like a poison cloud. I gripped my water glass tighter, watching condensation drip down its sides while trying to maintain my composure. "Speaking of luxuries," Elaine chimed in, "did everyone see the new Cartier collection? I picked up the most gorgeous tennis bracelet last week. 24 diamonds, perfectly matched." "Investment pieces are so important," Patricia agreed. "Quality jewelry holds its value, unlike those trendy costume pieces you see everywhere these days." I self-consciously touched the simple gold chain at my neck, a gift from my parents for my wedding day. It wasn't Cartier, but it represented love and sacrifice that these people would never understand. Then came the main course. Servers entered carrying silver trays with sizzling prime ribeye steaks, perfectly cooked to each guest's preference, accompanied by roasted vegetables and truffle mashed potatoes. The aroma filled the room and appreciative murmurs rippled around the table. "Oh my goodness," Elaine exclaimed, as her plate was set before her. "These look incredible, Mom. What did this cost per pound?" "Money is no object when celebrating family," Patricia replied pointedly. "These are Wagyu beef, flown in specially from Japan. Only the best for the people we love most." A server plates plates before each person until he reached me. Instead of the steak everyone else received, he set down a small plain garden salad with no dressing. The contrast between my sparse plate and the elaborate meal surrounding me couldn't have been more stark. The salad consisted of a few leaves of iceberg lettuce, a cherry tomato cut in half, and a slice of cucumber. It looked like something you'd find at a gas station convenience store. The humiliation was complete and deliberate. While everyone else cut into steaks that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a month, I stared at wilted lettuce leaves that belonged in a fast food restaurant. Madeline set down her fork with a sharp clink against her plate. "Patricia, why does Mia have a salad when everyone else has steak?" The table fell quiet, conversations pausing as attention turned to our end of the table. Patricia's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "I only ordered for family," she said, her voice honey-sweet but laced with venom. "The steaks were quite expensive, flown in from Japan. I'm sure Mia appreciates something lighter anyway. She's always been so conscious about her figure." The insult was delivered with such practiced sweetness that it took a moment for its full impact to register. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for my reaction. Next to me, Brian continued cutting his steak, his eyes fixed firmly on his plate, the sound of his knife against the expensive china echoing in the sudden quiet. "Am I family or not?" I asked him quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Brian glanced up, his expression pained. "Don't do this, not here," he muttered, still chewing his expensive Wagyu beef. That was when something inside me broke. 2 years of slights, exclusions, and pretending not to notice crashed down on me at once. I had endured Patricia's passive-aggressive behavior for Brian's sake, believing that eventually she would accept me. But sitting there with a plain salad while everyone else enjoyed premium steak, I realized nothing would ever change unless I made it change. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just being paranoid or oversensitive, as Brian often suggested when I brought up his mother's behavior. This was calculated, deliberate exclusion designed to make me feel like an outsider in my own husband's family. The evidence was right there on everyone's plates. Premium Wagyu beef for the family, gas station salad for the unwanted daughter-in-law. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had witnessed this humiliation and said nothing. Brian's cousin, James, continued discussing investment strategies as if nothing unusual had happened. Elaine focused intently on her steak, avoiding eye contact with me entirely. Michael and Stephanie whispered to each other while petting their meat with surgical precision. Only Madeline seemed truly upset on my behalf. Her jaw clenched as she stared down Patricia from across the table. Stephen looked confused and uncomfortable, glancing between his wife and me as if trying to understand what was happening. But nobody else seemed willing to acknowledge that anything was wrong. "These steaks are absolutely perfect," Charlotte announced, breaking the tension with false cheer. "Patricia, you've truly outdone yourself. The flavor is extraordinary." "Thank you," Patricia replied, her composure returning as the conversation shifted away from my situation. "I spent weeks researching the best suppliers. When you're celebrating someone as important as Stephen, only perfection will do." Brian cut another piece of his steak, chewed thoughtfully, and nodded in agreement. "It's incredible, Mom. Thank you for arranging such a special evening for Dad." The casual way he thanked his mother for the meal that I was excluded from felt like a slap across the face. He wasn't just enabling Patricia's behavior, he was actively participating in it now. As dessert preparation began in the background, servers wheeling in carts loaded with elegant ramekins and what appeared to be freshly whipped cream, I felt my last shred of hope dissolving. I knew what was coming next. I would sit and watch while everyone else enjoyed their dessert, probably some elaborate creation that cost more than most people spent on an entire meal. "I can't wait to try these soufflés. The chef's reputation precedes him. Didn't he just cater the governor's inaugural dinner?" "The very same," confirmed Patricia with obvious pride. "It took months to book him, but nothing but the best for family occasions." The word family hung in the air like a weapon aimed directly at me. Patricia's message was crystal clear. This chef, this meal, this entire elaborate production was for family members only. I was just a spectator to their world of privilege and exclusion. As dessert was served, elaborate individual chocolate soufflés rising majestically from ramekins, I once again received nothing, not even a mint or a cookie, just an empty space where my dessert should have been. I watched as everyone at the table savored their soufflés, making appreciative noises and complimenting Patricia on the menu. "These are heavenly," Elaine Michaels' wife gushed. "The chocolate is so rich and complex. What type did you use?" "Belgian Valrhona," Patricia replied knowledgeably. 70% cacao. The chef insisted on importing it specifically for tonight. I believe in using only the finest ingredients when honoring the people who matter most. Brian was so absorbed in his dessert that he didn't offer to share, didn't even seem to notice that I sat beside him with nothing. His fork moved mechanically from the ramekin to his mouth while he nodded along to his father's stories about building the investment firm from the ground up. My hands trembled slightly in my lap as I gathered my courage. The injustice of the situation was overwhelming. Here I was, legally and morally, a member of this family, sitting among people who were treating me like an uninvited stranger. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. I wasn't worthy of their food, their inclusion, their basic respect. Madeline sensed my resolve and squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support that gave me the final push I needed. Her touch reminded me that I wasn't alone, that at least one person in this room saw the cruelty of what was happening and stood with me. I had spent 2 years trying to fit into a family that had no intention of making room for me. 2 years of shrinking myself, accepting disrespect, and pretending not to notice the 1,000 paper cuts to my dignity. I had changed my wardrobe to match their expectations, modified my speech patterns to sound more refined, even adjusted my career goals to seem less threatening to their established hierarchy. But nothing had been enough. No amount of accommodation, compromise, or self-diminishment would ever earn Patricia's acceptance because she didn't want to accept me. My existence threatened her control over Brian, and she was determined to drive me away through systematic humiliation. As I looked around the family, laughing and enjoying their meal, while I sat excluded, I knew this moment would define our future. The laughter seemed to echo mockingly in my ears, each joyful sound highlighting my isolation. These people were celebrating while deliberately excluding me, finding pleasure in an event designed to make me feel worthless. I could stay silent and accept my place as an outsider forever, teaching Patricia that her tactics worked and encouraging her to continue her campaign against me. Or I could stand up for myself, whatever the consequences might be. The thought of enduring more years of this treatment, of raising children in the family where their mother was treated as a second-class citizen, filled me with determination. I chose to stand up. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart, "I'd like to address something." The conversations around the table gradually quieted as people realized I was speaking. Brian tensed beside me, his fork pausing midway to his mouth, chocolate souffle nipping back into the ramekin. "Mia, not now," he whispered urgently. But I continued, my gaze fixed on Patricia at the head of the table. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of panic in her eyes as she realized I was about to upset her carefully orchestrated evening. For 2 years, I've tried to be part of this family. I've overlooked the slights, excused the accidental exclusions, and accepted being treated as less than. But tonight has made something very clear that I can no longer ignore. Patricia's smile remained fixed, though her knuckles whitened around her dessert spoon. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. This is hardly the time for whatever grievance you've invented." "Invented?" I repeated, maintaining my composure despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Let me be specific then. Tonight, I was the only person not given a place card. I was the only one servers consistently overlooked for drinks and appetizers. I received a plain salad while everyone else enjoyed steak. And now, no dessert." I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each family member. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others appeared surprised, as if they hadn't noticed the pattern until I pointed it out. The elderly woman sitting next to Stephen actually gasped softly, her hand moving to cover her heart. "But this isn't just about tonight," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "It's about the Christmas gift exchange, where everyone received a present except me because I wasn't on the family list. It's about the family vacation photos, where I was asked to step aside so you could get just the family. It's about my wedding picture being the only one absent from your family photo wall." "Now wait just a minute," Patricia started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "It's about the Easter brunch where you forgot to set a place for me, claiming you miscounted. It's about the Mother's Day celebration where you thanked every woman at the table for their contributions to the family except me. It's about the New Year's Eve party where you introduced everyone to your friends except your son's wife, who apparently didn't warrant an introduction." Stephen frowned, looking genuinely confused. "Patricia, is this true?" Before Patricia could respond, Madeline spoke up. "It's all true, Stephen. I've witnessed it myself numerous times. Your wife has systematically excluded Mia from family events for 2 years, and I've watched this sweet girl endure it with more grace than Patricia deserved." "This is absolutely ridiculous," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly, the refined hostess mask beginning to slip. "Mia has always been overly sensitive about everything. We've done nothing but welcome her into our home with open arms." "Welcome me?" I echoed in disbelief. "You've systematically excluded me from day one. You compare me unfavorably to Julia at every opportunity. You forget to include me in family events. You dismiss my career, my background, everything about me as inferior to your standards." "That's not fair," Elaine interrupted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Mom has always been welcoming to family members." "Has she?" I turned to face Elaine directly. "Can you honestly say you've seen your mother treat me the same way she treats Stephanie, or the way she treated Julia when Brian was dating her?" Elaine opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to form a defense. "You know what I think?" I continued, addressing the entire table now. "I think Patricia has made it her mission to drive me away from Brian because she can't control me the way she controls everyone else in this family. I didn't come from the right background. I don't have the right pedigree. I threaten her perfect vision of what her son's life should look like." "How dare you psychoanalyze me at my own dinner table?" Patricia snapped, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You ungrateful little gold digger. You trapped my son with your middle-class desperation, and now you want to poison him against his own mother?" The slur hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Several guests audibly gasped. Stephen's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. "Patricia!" Stephen shouted, slamming his hand on the table so hard that wine glasses jumped. "That is completely unacceptable." But Patricia was beyond caring about appearances now. Years of barely contained hostility came pouring out. "She's never been good enough for our son, and everyone in this room knows it. I've merely been the only one with the courage to acknowledge it publicly." "The courage? You call systematically bullying your son's wife courage? You call excluding me from family events and starving me at dinner parties courage? I call it protecting my family from fortune hunters and social climbers. You saw an opportunity with Brian and you took it, but you'll never truly belong in our world, no matter how hard you try to pretend otherwise." Brian looked torn, his gaze moving frantically between his mother and me. The dessert spoon in his hand shook slightly as he struggled with conflicting loyalties that had been instilled in him since childhood. "Mom, please stop," he said weakly, but made no move to defend me or control his mother's escalating attack. "Choose, Brian," Patricia demanded, her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. "Right now, your family or her, because you cannot have both." The ultimatum echoed through the dining room with the force of a gunshot. 22 pairs of eyes moved to Brian, waiting for his response. I held my breath, part of me still hoping against all evidence that he would finally choose me over his mother's toxic control. Brian swallowed hard, looking at his mother with her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress radiating the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of getting our way. Then he looked at me, standing alone with my stained dress and empty plate, representing everything his mother had taught him to see as inferior. Finally, he looked down at his half-eaten souffle, the chocolate now seeming to fascinate him more than the choice between his wife and his mother. His silence was answer enough. Stephen stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This ends now," he declared, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard from him before. "Patricia, you've crossed every line of decency tonight. And Brian, your cowardice is shameful." But it was too late. The damage was done. Brian had made his choice through inaction, just that he'd been making it for 2 years. Every silent moment while his mother belittled me, every deflection when I tried to discuss the problem, every excuse he'd made for Patricia's behavior had led to this moment. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my empty plate with deliberate care. The simple action felt monumental, like I was finally taking control of my own dignity after years of letting others dictate my worth. "Thank you for making this so clear, both of you," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted or respected." Patricia's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. She hadn't expected me to actually leave. She had assumed I would swallow this humiliation like all the others, that I would continue to accept my role as the unwanted outsider because I had too much to lose by standing up for myself. "Mia, don't be ridiculous," she said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Sit down. You're making a scene over nothing." "Nothing," I repeated, incredulous. "You deliberately excluded me from a family dinner in the most humiliating way possible, and you call it nothing?" Dignity was all I had left, and I clung to it as I walked toward the dining room exit. Each step felt like I was walking away from the life I tried so hard to build, but also towards something better, something where I wouldn't have to beg for basic respect. No one called after me. No one followed. Not even Brian. As I reached the doorway, I turned back one final time. The sight that greeted me perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with this family. 22 people sitting around an elegant table, continuing their meal as if nothing had happened, while my empty chair stood as a monument to their collective cowardice and complicity. "Enjoy your dessert," I said to the room at large. "I hope it tastes better than your conscience feels." In the foyer, I collected my coat from the confused staff member and stepped out into the cool October night. Tears threatened, but I refused to shed them on Patricia's property. I made it to my car before I heard footsteps behind me. "Mia, wait." It was Madeline, not Brian. "I need to go," I said, fumbling with my keys. "I know, sweetheart, but you shouldn't drive upset. Let me take you home." "I can manage," I insisted, though my hands were shaking. "Then I'll follow you to make sure you get there safely," Madeline said firmly. "And Mia, I'm proud of you. What you did in there took tremendous courage." As I drove away from the mansion, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Madeline's headlights were steady behind me, but there was no sign of Brian in the driveway. No sign that my husband had chosen to follow his wife instead of remaining with his mother. That told me everything I needed to know. I arrived at our apartment building with Madeline close behind. The doorman greeted me with his usual friendly smile, unaware that my world had just imploded. In the elevator, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Do you want me to come up?" Madeline asked gently. I shook my head.
I need some time alone, but thank you for being there tonight. Call me anytime, day or night, she insisted, hugging me tightly before the elevator doors opened to my floor. Inside our apartment, the silence was deafening. Photos of Brian and me from happier times seemed to mock me from the walls. Our wedding portrait, the one Patricia had never displayed, held center place above our fireplace. We looked so happy, so hopeful. That couple seemed like strangers now. Only when the door was locked behind me did I finally let the tears come. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, and sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. All the hurt, humiliation, and betrayal poured out in waves that left me gasping for breath. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from Brian, but I let them go to voicemail. When I finally listened to his messages, there was no apology, only anger. How could you embarrass my family like that on tonight of all nights, my father's retirement dinner? Mia, you need to call my mother and apologize immediately. The unfairness of his demand unleashed a fresh wave of tears. In what universe was I the one who owed an apology? Around midnight, I heard Brian's key in the lock. I had moved from the floor to the bedroom by then, sitting on our bed with a suitcase half-packed beside me. "What are you doing?" he demanded, seeing the suitcase. "I'm packing," I said simply. "I'm going to stay with Madeline for a while." "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed. "Running away won't solve anything." "I'm not running away. I'm removing myself from a situation where I'm not respected or valued."
Brian paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "You humiliated my mother in front of our entire family. What did you expect would happen?" "What did I expect?" I repeated incredulously. "I expected my husband to defend me when his mother deliberately excluded and insulted me. I expected to be treated with basic human decency at a family dinner. My mother is particular about her events. You know that." "Particular?" I laughed bitterly. "Brian, she served me a plain salad while everyone else got steak. She didn't give me dessert. How can you possibly defend that?" "You're exaggerating, as usual," he dismissed. "If you had just quietly spoken to me after dinner instead of making a scene, like all the other times I've quietly spoken to you about your mother's behavior, when has that ever changed anything?" Brian sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. My father is retiring. The firm is transitioning. My mother has always done things a certain way. A certain way that deliberately excludes and humiliates your wife," I said flatly. "She's having a hard time adjusting to changes in the family. If you would just try harder to fit in." Something in me snapped at those words. "Try harder? I've done nothing but try for 2 years. I've changed how I dress, how I speak, what I talk about. I've attended every family function, joined committees, donated to charities I can't afford. What more could I possibly do?" "You could start by apologizing to my mother." I zipped the suitcase closed with finality. I won't apologize for finally standing up for myself. As I moved toward the door, Brian blocked my path. "If you leave now, you're choosing this conflict over our marriage." "No, Brian, you already made that choice when you sat silently while your mother treated me like garbage, when you texted her agreeing that I didn't fit in, when you demanded I apologize instead of acknowledging how deeply I've been hurt." I pushed past him with my suitcase, but his next words stopped me cold. "She warned me, you know. My mother said you would never truly fit into our world, that eventually you would show your true colors." I turned to face him one last time. "And she warned me too, in her way. She told me at our engagement dinner that your relationship with Julia ended because she didn't support your career enough. But that was a lie, wasn't it? It ended because she finally got tired of your mother's treatment and your failure to stand up to her." Brian's shocked expression confirmed my suspicion. "How did you know about that?"
I didn't until just now, but it makes sense. Has your mother been in contact with Julia recently? Perhaps invited her to lunch? Brian's silence was damning. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Goodbye, Brian.
I spent that night on Madeline's couch, alternating between tears and numbness. In the morning, Madeline made coffee and sat beside me. "What happens now?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to fight for my marriage, but a larger part is wondering if there's anything left worth fighting for." The next week passed in a blur. Brian called and texted constantly, alternating between demands that I return home and apologies that never quite acknowledged the real issues. I maintained minimal contact, telling him I needed space to think. Then came the unexpected allies. Michael called me privately, something he'd never done before. "Mia, I want you to know that Stephanie and I support you," he said awkwardly. "What happened at that dinner was wrong. Mom has always been difficult, but this was beyond anything acceptable." Later that day, Stephanie texted me. "When I first married Michael, Patricia treated me similarly. Not as extreme, but the same pattern. It took years in my joining the firm before she accepted me. I just wanted you to know you're not alone or crazy. What she did was cruel." Even more surprising was Elaine showing up at Madeline's apartment unannounced. "I should have said something that night," she admitted, looking genuinely remorseful. "I've watched Mom treat you poorly for 2 years and said nothing. I was afraid of becoming her next target." "Has she always been like this?" I asked. Elaine nodded. "With anyone she perceives as a threat to her control over the family, yes. Dad has enabled it for decades. Michael and I learned to navigate it. Brian was always her favorite, so he never had to." The most awkward interaction came when Stephen called me directly. "Mia, this is Stephen," he said formally. "I want to apologize for what happened at our home. I had no idea the extent of, well, I should have been more observant, more involved." "Thank you," I said, surprised by his call. "Patricia and I are discussing the situation," he continued. "I want you to know that I consider you family, regardless of how poorly that was demonstrated." While these unexpected supports helped, Brian's behavior grew more concerning. He seemed to swing between contrition and anger, never fully acknowledging the fundamental problem. 2 weeks after the dinner, he delivered an ultimatum of his own. "Either you come home and make peace with my mother, or we need to rethink our marriage." That same day, I received a certified letter from a lawyer representing Patricia Harrington, claiming I had borrowed and failed to return several items of jewelry from our home. It was a blatant lie and an obvious attempt at intimidation. 6 months later, everything had changed. After intensive couples therapy and family counseling, Brian finally learned to prioritize our marriage over his mother's approval. Patricia, faced with the choice between maintaining her controlling behavior or losing her relationship with her son, chose to participate in therapy and slowly began to change. The breakthrough came when I announced my pregnancy. For the first time, Patricia looked at me not as an intruder, but as the woman carrying her grandchild. It forced a recognition that I was truly part of the family, whether she liked it or not. Today, our family photo includes not just Brian and me, but Madeline, Stephen, Michael, Stephanie, Elaine and her husband, and yes, even Patricia. It's not a perfect family, not without its tensions and ongoing work, but it's a family where everyone is seen, included, and valued. If you've ever faced similar struggles with in-laws or family members who made you feel excluded, remember that you deserve respect and inclusion. Standing up for yourself may be frightening, but remaining silent only ensures that nothing will change. Your voice matters. Your place at the table matters.